Well, hello everybody and welcome to Charlton Live. I hope you guys are well. My name is Louis Meadows. On this week's show, we will of course be looking back at yesterday's 2-0 defeat up at Derby County. A special good morning to everybody joining us live on YouTube for our second live stream. I hope you guys are well. Make sure you get involved in the comment section. So joining me on this week's show as we, as I say, look back at that game at Derby. First up, making his debut on YouTube, Joe Puddyfoot. How you doing, Joe?
Yeah, good. It's nice to finally see you all. I only ever chatted in the other format where we couldn't see each other. So,
you look nothing like I expected, actually. Yeah, in my mind, you were just like a pile of water on the floor. But
I thought that might be where that one was going, Louis. I'm not going to lie. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us. And also joining us is Lewis Cat. How you doing this morning? Feeling better?
Morning, guys. Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad. Still a bit bunged up. And I would say yesterday made it a lot worse, I'd say. But here we are, life of a Charlton fan.
Yeah, yesterday was a wonderful reminder of where we are compared to teams that are actually any good. And that turns out we are an absolute mile away from them. So on this week's show, as I said, we're going to hear the highlights of that game very shortly. We will, of course, hear Dean Holden's reaction to the performance as well. We'll let you guys have your say. So if you want to put any comments in the comment section, let us know what you made of yesterday's performance. Are there any players that stood out, good or bad, based on yesterday's showing? Where do you think we are? I'm starting to argue, as I have been for the last few months, that the season's long over now. But what are we going to try and do for the rest of the season? How do you keep your interest peaked while we sort of meander slowly towards another season in mid-table? So get your comments into the comment section. You can also email us, studio@charltonlive.co.uk, or you can tweet us at Charlton Live to have your say on yesterday's performance. We've got loads of discussion points already that's been tweeted in and emailed as well. So look forward to you guys getting involved. If you put your comments into the comment section on YouTube as well, we can bring them up onto the screen and we can discuss them. Also, we're trialing a new feature at the end. I wanted to get some more voices and more faces onto our Charlton live stream. So we're going to bring in a guest later, Greg Stubley, the Charlton commentator, going to join us for the last 20 minutes or so. So if you've got any questions for him, we'll discuss yesterday's performance. We'll discuss everything about the Addicks with Greg as well, a thoroughly decent chap. So looking forward to having him on later in the show. So just before we hear the highlights, Joe, it felt like the writing was very much on the wall after about 10 minutes yesterday. And then it was a disappointing afternoon. We had a couple of moments, literally two, that Raksaki chance and the one for Fraser at the start of the second half. But, Derby had 4 or 5 good moments. And I felt like, if you compare them to, for example, Bolton, they weren't even that good, but they were clearly still a few years ahead of us in where we need to be.
Yeah, it was night and day, really, from start to finish. I thought we looked leggy. I think we didn't really look like a cohesive team. They looked really well drilled. They looked really comfortable on the ball, and they had gears to go through that we just couldn't match. It was pretty much a hiding nothing. We might as well have just sent them the 3 points in the post. Really, it would have saved everyone a lot of time. But it's one of those, isn't it? We're petering out towards the end of the season. The motivation for the players has got to be going, but also you kind of want to start building, and yesterday doesn't show you any signs that you're sort of building any momentum towards next season. It just sort of feels like that we're going to have a lot more of those games where we're just petering out against teams that are just a lot better than us, that are enjoying a much better season and actually have some enjoyment to look forward to for the next few months. So it's going to be a bit of a slog, it feels like, from this point onwards.
Yeah, certainly, and getting some good comments coming in already, which we will discuss after the highlights, Lewis. Like I say, the most disappointing thing for me, the most chastening thing out of the last couple of weeks is, we can go to Exeter and be fine, have a good old game, show a little bit of quality here and there. We can go to Forest Green and grind out a win. But when we play Derby, when we play Bolton, I think the only exception recently is Barnsley, who had a massive off day when they came to the Valley. But whenever we've played a proper top six outfit recently, bear in mind at the start of the season, we were doing okay against them. But now that we've sort of got into our little rut, it's obvious that we're a mile off these teams. And like, you go to a Derby County ground yesterday, Pride Park, there's 27,000. There's more in there than the capacity of our stadium. But it was raucous. The atmosphere was quite good from the home fans behind the goal when they got going, not always, but it just felt like going to a different world.
Yeah, your comment from a few weeks ago when we played Bolton it was definitely reflective of yesterday as well. It's a club that have been on a similar journey to us over the last couple of years in terms of struggles off the pitch, but are in a completely different part of that journey now, where they seem to be bouncing back from it. As you say, there was a big crowd in there yesterday, big supportive crowd. They've got a manager in Paul Warren who's obviously very well established at this level, and a very strong squad as well. And that positivity carries a long way. Derby were dead and buried, a season ago when they were staring relegation and what they had to do to try and avoid it with the points deductions, etc., and sort of that fall from grace. But they've got it right now off the pitch. They've brought in a manager that they know can steer them in the right direction. Fans are buying into that, and fans are investing into that because their ownership is investing into that football club, which is making them a competitive outfit. And there's a reason they're up there, and it was the same with Bolton the other week. They're a team that have struggled like that off the pitch scenarios. They've bounced back. I mean, Bolton have fallen further than us and have bounced back even quicker, which makes it even more depressing, really, when you consider they dropped all the way to League Two and have still, it almost feels like they've lapped us. It's tough to see. It's really tough to see. But ultimately, you get out of something what you put into it. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like a hell of a lot's being put into it. And that's why we're sitting stagnant. And Joe hit the nail on the head. It was like men versus boys yesterday in terms of, we were divisions apart, what felt like, from watching the game. Even the spells that we had in possession, we just looked panicked and we didn't look comfortable on the ball. And a lot of the time we ended up, maybe starting a fairly positive move, and then we would give the ball back to Derby and we'd be on the back foot again. And that's what happens when you have established players in a squad like Derby's with depth on the bench that can change games. And when you look at our squad, which is, young, loan heavy, and probably fairly inexperienced, but it's as you say, it's one of them where you just feel miles apart. Considering you're in the same division, and you'd probably consider yourself similar in terms of size and where you should be in this division, the actual gap between the two clubs at the moment is tough to take.
Because we spent the last however long, as I've said recently, actively being downsized, whereas Derby, they've been through to hell and back. They even had their own little confrontation with Mr. Matt Southall as well, but they've come out of it the other side with an ownership, as we heard from Callum Bucock on Thursday's show, that seemed to have the best interest of the club at heart, and that's where we are. As I said, Matt Morris has said it's woeful. It must be one of our poorest games of the season, and it's certainly probably up there as well. Well, let's have a quick listen back to the goals from Charlton TV yesterday. The commentators were Greg Stubley and Terry Smith.
Derby have it on the right-hand side. Sweet Mendes Lane goes past Sessignon, gets the cross in, headed away by Hector. It'll drop to Burkhausen, then it drops again to Kurt Hurahan, blocked away by Hector once more. And the referee is giving a penalty here. Is the judge Hector to have handled that? The shot came in from Hurahan. It was Hector that was in the way, and the referees adjudged that to have been a handball. Well, Hector's having no complaints, so it's difficult to see from where we are. Tell yes, a blatant handball. No question about it. He sticks his arm out to his left. It comes off it. I thought at first maybe it came off the top of his arm, but looking at that, only just this replay I've just seen, you can see his arm moving out. And there's no complaints from Hector, which sometimes says none of his teammates are. I mean, Alvin Morgan's complaining a little bit, but John just struggled to clear. Hector won the first header, but then it was a bit... Yeah, you're right. Just in the replay.
Bobbling,
and John just couldn't clear it away, and Derby have a glorious chance within the opening 10 minutes to get the first goal. McGoldrick with the penalty. Straight down the middle. 1-0. Actually, Maynard Brewer went to his right. The ball went straight down the middle from this angle to Derby. It's on the Charlton right-hand side. Yard in from the touchline. Sent in towards the penalty spot, and it's a header coming in from Cashin, and that's the second goal. Charlton will complain about the free kick awarded. Cashin got to the cross first. And a late run in towards the penalty spot. Actually, he was already by the penalty spot. Went one way, then the other. Just in front of Hector. Gives Derby a 2-0 lead. Yeah, it's a brilliant header, but the delivery from Hourihane is outstanding. Whips it with his left foot. Makes it so hard to defend. Hector is next to Cashin, but Cashin's gets across his man. It's a brilliant header. Leaves Ashley Maynard with no chance. The delivery is brilliant though. Just beats McGoldrick. Cashin is there.
There we go. Cheers to Greg and Terry for that, and for Glove Putt for sorting out the recording. But yeah, frustrating. The writing being on the wall, as I said at the top, Joe, from the start. Did you think it was a penalty? In real time, it felt like his arm was sort of out, but he did sort of lean at the same time. So if he's leant with his arm not actually that far out, but he's moved it towards the ball as part of his whole body, I guess it probably was one. But you know, I don't want to sound like Terry Smith, but I was wondering if maybe we were hard done by at first.
For me, it's a pen because of the lean. I think if he doesn't lean, he's got a very strong argument that what can he do, because it is rifled at him. But I think it's a pen that comes from being rusty. I think if he'd had another 6, 7, 8 games under his belt, he probably either gets his arm out the way or manages to get more of a chest in the way. But yeah, it was, for me, it was a fairly. Put it this way: if it was the other way around, I'd be blue in the face if it hadn't been given. So I don't think we can have too many complaints. And the penalty itself was very, very well taken. One of those where if you've got a player of that quality, it's almost a foregone conclusion that you're going to concede in that way. And you know, it was 6, 7, 8 minutes in, something like that, but it just felt like we were already under so much pressure. It was already coming. It was a bit sort of disappointing that it did come, because you were thinking if you maybe outlive that, maybe you can get a bit of a foothold. But yeah, it was one of those. I don't think we can have any complaints. I think Hector himself will be a bit disappointed on both of them, to be honest, on both goals. But
yeah, we can see Dan's comment here. There were many bad players for me, but Hector was awful yesterday. He kept hoofing the ball forward for nothing. Him not playing in ages is showing. I mean, did you get that from his performance, Lewis, yesterday? He was, as we said, obviously he gave away the penalty for the goal. He was the man beaten by Cashin as well for the second header as well, the second goal. What did you make of his? So it was his full debut, obviously, after coming off the bench against Forest Green in midweek.
Yeah, it was. If I'm being honest, I thought it was a bit of a strange call to chuck him in from the start, to be honest, because I know we've spoken about Runniness, many times on this show about his, potential of a red card or being a little bit reckless or the odd mistake. But I would say since Dean's come in, on the whole, bar maybe a couple of wobbles, he's actually been much improved than he was under Ben Garner, and he's played a lot of football this season. I think he's made the most appearances in a single season this year, which is massive for him, and I think that's helping his consistency. So I was quite surprised to see him come out for Hector, especially given the lack of football that he has had. He came on obviously Tuesday against Forest Green, and and did the dirty work when we needed him to. Daniel mentioned about sort of the hoofball. It's all right if you're coming on in the 80th minute and doing that to try and see out a victory. But if that's the game plan from the off, it does become a bit of an issue. I think I agree with Joe. I think with the penalty, I think it was unfortunate, but it comes from a bit of rustiness. I think just the reaction to lean towards the ball to stop it going goalwards. I don't even think the shot was on target, really, which is a shame. And to concede a penalty that early at a team that are in fine form in Derby is obviously it gives you that uphill battle straight away. And from then, I mean, Joe mentioned and touched on the second goal. I think just those individual battles weren't always won. And when you've got big experienced players like David McGoldrick, and you've got pacey people coming in like Mendes Lang and things like that, you're gonna be tested more than you are against a team like Forest Green. And that's no offense to Forest Green, but you are. So I was surprised to see that change yesterday. I think overall, Hector will be a good signing once he gets up to speed, but it's just that, again, that short-termness. I don't know how long he's, I can't remember if his deal's only until the end of the season, and if it is, you'd argue, is he going to be fully up to speed before the season comes to an end? Where's the benefit there? Maybe it's just a bit of cover, but for me, I'd have just stuck with Ryan Innish yesterday, because I think him and Ness have been forming a fairly decent partnership in centre half, and I think to go, I don't know, away from home, one of the tougher sides in the division, and to change your defensive partnership was a little bit of a questionable decision yesterday from Dino.
Yeah, I did ask Dean about that. We'll hear that in my interview with Dean Holden later on. I mean, Lucy said there, do you think if Ashley had saved the penalty, we would have had much more confidence, or still not enough? I mean, the way we'd sort of started on the back foot and the way the game progressed, I thought we got a bit of a foothold of it in the second half without still creating anything. I think even if he had saved that penalty, I couldn't see it all of a sudden turning into a great backs to the wall away performance where we look really solid. Derby throughout that game probably had 3 or 4 gilt-edged opportunities that, we were reasonably lucky that they didn't really have their shooting boots. I mean, how many times did the ball drop to David McGoldrick on the edge of the box yesterday, and he seemed to completely slice his shot, which is amazing considering he's one of the top scorers in League One. I think even if we had saved that penalty, Joe, I couldn't see that game going any differently. Really, it felt like it was inevitable from pretty much the get-go.
Yeah, it had an inevitability about it. I think yesterday, one of the things that sort of shone through to me is just how difficult we found it to get some cohesive play, string a few passes together and take the pressure off. We've touched on hoofball tactics potentially, but when it went into midfield, we were just overrun. They were intercepting it easy. How many times did Dobbo have a pass intercepted yesterday? And he's normally one of our strongest players on the ball. Fraser didn't really get into it at all. Morgan was very peripheral as well, I felt. So when you've got that sort of pressure in and amongst the midfield, and you're not able to alleviate the pressure, and when you do get it to Blackett-Taylor and Raksaki, they were isolated, I felt, again yesterday, and they were trying to do everything on their own. So there's no way that you could sort of build the momentum and pressure to get yourself up the pitch. And so it becomes backs against the walls, with them just heaping more and more and more attacks into your box. And if you look at where their shots were, they really should have had more yesterday. I think we were quite lucky to get away with just conceding 2. And I think we were probably lucky to get away with being credited with 0 goals. So I'm not even sure we deserve that. We didn't threaten them really at all.
Yeah, Nathan sent me a text yesterday saying that apparently at half-time our expected goals, XG, which I know not everyone likes, but it is a reasonable indication. Apparently it was something like 0.08. The only chance we had, I was trying to find it what it was at full time. I couldn't find it yesterday. But the only chance really we had in that first half, and ironically, it did come from a Macaulay Bonne flick on, because I thought he was so anonymous yesterday. He had 5 touches of the ball in that first half, and Dan's just said, they were doubling up on the wingers, so we couldn't do anything. Bonne should never be chosen again. It was woeful, the worst this season. I mean, in terms of Macaulay Bonne, those 5 touches he had in the first half. I mean, I felt bad about it, but I was really tickled by that dreadful attempted cross he put in the first minute, where he tried. I don't know what he was trying to do, but he absolutely punted it into the Derby fans behind the goal. But there's probably two parts to what went wrong with Macaulay yesterday, and we could probably zoom in on pretty much every player in the team yesterday, maybe other than Dobbo, but he's clearly lacking in confidence, and he clearly has not achieved anything. He hasn't scored a goal in over a year for anyone. But also, if we only get the ball to him 5 times, well, that does suggest that something as a team isn't working right as well, Lewis.
Yeah, 100%. And as Daniel says there, like, because they were doubling up on the wingers, there's good reason, because that's the only threat we have when we go forward is Corey and Jez. And if those two aren't getting the ball, then that does isolate others and limit the chances that we do get. And you're right. I mean, there's rightful criticism of Bon since he's come in, because he hasn't had that impact that I think that we've needed, especially given, regardless of how bad his season may have been, given the loss of Jaden Stockley, because someone's got to replace that void. And if we're looking at Maka as the incoming that we had in January that replaced the outgoing of Jaden, then that's not paid off so far. And I know it's early, it's what, 6 weeks since he joined, maybe 4 or 5 weeks since he came back, and we haven't really seen much of it yet. Haven't seen him at his best. And as you say, confidence must be a big part in that, because he hasn't scored for so long for anyone. I don't doubt that he can do it at this level, because he has done for Ipswich, but that's in an Ipswich side that, are absolutely blessed with talent and squad depth and creative players. You've got him in a side now that is struggling to create chances. And when we're not clinical. Like, the thing that annoys me the most is that we almost try to pass the ball into the net, but we're almost not good enough to pass it that many times to get it that close to the net to pass it in the net. When I look back at a few games recently when we've conceded absolute screamers, my biggest frustration has been that we don't have anyone in our team that would think, when they've got nothing on, would think, I have got nothing on, all I can do here is have a pop. And, on the odd occasion it will go in. We don't have that. If we have nothing on, we go backwards and reset and go again. In terms of attacking intent, we do really struggle, and it's a big frustration of mine, mainly under Ben, because we went through that whole passing and possession based football that didn't always create the most amount of chances, and then now maybe under Dino we're seeing spells and glimmers of it, but not enough, especially from the forward men. And we're massively reliant, as we've said previously, on Jezrak Saki for goals. He's not going to be here next season. We're then reliant on 19-year-old Miles Leaburn for goals. He's injured, and it's that same argument we've had every season when we've brought a young player through too early, or we've brought a young player through, that we're putting too much pressure on them. And then we've got Chuks and Maka. Chuks is, we know the situation with him in terms of his fitness. He can't play 90 minutes. He came on yesterday and did more than Maka did. And then we've got Bon, who's completely shot of all confidence, and it's the same position that we were under Jaden. We're no better off than we were at the start of January in terms of attacking options, and that's a real disappointment.
Yeah, again, we'll hear from Dean. He admits that Charlton are light in that position. Just before we do hear from the Addicks boss then, so a couple of bits came in on Twitter. So Facts and Stats, they've got no goals now in 9 league and cup games since the start of 2023 for whoever is the Charlton centre forward. Is it time to go 2 up front again? And all hell let loose, says, is Macaulay Bon good enough to be a starter for Charlton, or is he not suited to a 4-3-3? Please discuss. And I find that an interesting point, because actually when I was writing my takeaways on the train home yesterday, obviously I did highlight the Macaulay Bon situation, but I do also say, obviously I haven't published these yet, so it'll be out soon, but we've struggled to get our main striker involved in a 4-3-3 for probably 2 years now, if we're being honest, Joe. Anytime we've played a 4-3-3 at the end last season and this season, Stockley struggled, I think Anike struggled when he started at Forest Green. Obviously Bon has struggled big time, I think. Maybe the only one is Miles Leaburn, and even then I think he's been better suited when it's been the two. So I mean that's the argument, isn't it? Both those two tweeters there have just said, do we go to 2 up top? Do we change this formation that Dean's come in and had some success with, because it's not getting our forward men into the game enough? We score a lot of goals is the only thing I would say. Like before yesterday, Derby were one of only 5 sides that scored more than us. So are we getting a bit carried away because of that? Because we're not seeing enough from Macaulay? I don't know.
So if you go to 2 up top, that means you've got to start Bon and Anike. And then that means that you've got nothing to change it up in the second half. So that's half the problem at the minute. We don't have enough players in the building to play two up top. We don't have enough strikers. We have struggled a little bit in terms of getting the central striker to score, because I don't think we've necessarily got the best player to play up front on his own. I think Leeburn is the closest to that. Anike doesn't have the energy across 90 minutes, and Bond doesn't have enough on the ball to bring it down, shield it off a man and bring other people through. But if you are going to play one up top, you've got to get people flooding through from midfield to support that central striker for me. And I'm not sure that we're necessarily always doing that. When Fraser is on form and is able to fulfill that role, then that works quite nicely. But I don't think he's able to do that week in, week out. He's a bit of a patchy player in terms of form. I think it touched on something I was thinking about yesterday, which is how are we going to build for next season? I think to have the option to go two up top, I think we probably need to sign at least 2, if not 3 strikers, because I'm kind of assuming that Bon won't be here on a selfish level, kind of because I don't want him to be. But I think that you need to have more options available. I mean, yesterday your options were to put Bon and Anike up top and pull the wingers back, or to do a straight switch. And there's just not the flexibility there. I mean, for me, I think we've got 8 first-team senior players that could be a credible player to have in the squad next season, and 2 of them are goalkeepers. So it doesn't really leave you with an amazing amount of options, and it's a big rebuild that's needed in the summer. But the big thing, you've got to choose the players that suit the system that you want to play first of all, but you've also got to build a squad that is able to vary what you're doing. If you want to put a different option up top, or you want to change your formation, you've got to have enough bodies in the building, enough flexibility to be able to do that. And we just don't have those options available to us at the minute.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. I'd written down on my notes a question I was going to ask those who are listening live in the second half of the show is which players in the current squad could you legitimately say could play part of a promotion bid next season if we were in a position to go for a promotion bid? So who would you look in the current squad and say, yeah, so-and-so could be part of a team that's going for top 6 next season or for top 2 next season? So I would chuck those into the comments. We've got loads of comments in as well, actually. So it's feel free to keep coming out. I'll come to a few more of those after we hear from the Addicks boss, Dean Holden. Don't forget, we've got Greg Stubley coming up later on in the show as well. But yeah, I spoke to Dean after yesterday's game up at Pride Park and asked him for his thoughts on the defeat against Derby.
Defeat here at Derby, how did you see it this afternoon?
Well, I think when you come into a team and a club like this, which is flying high in division and been on an incredible run in the last few months, to concede a goal after 10 minutes is obviously going to be always difficult, puts you on the back foot. I haven't seen the penalty back. I don't think his arm was out. Well, he certainly wasn't outstretched. I don't know if he's maybe lent his body in towards the ball, if that's the reason the referees obviously give the penalty. We've had the big chance through Jez, the 1v1, and just didn't quite execute that. The goalkeeper did well and smothered it. And to be honest, I thought we were a better team in the second half. I thought most of the game was played in their half of the pitch, and they go and score, I think, around the 70th minute mark, which makes it so much more comfortable for them. Real sucker punch for us, really, in terms of how we could respond from that. And I genuinely don't think there was a lot in the game in between both boxes. I just think it's frightening how many basic errors we made today in terms of unopposed giveaways when we had the ball in promising areas, promising moments on transition. Whether it was a poor touch or a poor pass, which is not like us. I suppose that's a disappointing thing, because we're not then able to sustain them waves of attack to really put them under enough pressure to get back into the game. But I think even if you look at the first goal leading up to the penalty, we should stop the cross, we should defend that better. So again, always loads to work on. It's just a disappointing afternoon.
But do you think those unforced errors, why were they happening today if they haven't happened too often under your tenure?
I think it's not been perfect, far from it up to now. I think they've been there. I think there's been signs of that. I just think today there was just so many more. Carelessness, I suppose, and just a concentration level, really, a concentration issue. I mean, the pitch was fine, really good pitch, and yeah, we have to make sure that we're better in the moments.
Do you think like today's game with Derby, similar perhaps to the one with Bolton a couple of weeks ago, shows the difference in the quality of squads in the top six and where Charlton are currently, the ability to turn it on in an instant almost?
I think so, yeah. I think if you look at their squad, the subs they can make, it's again a team that's flying high, aren't they? So it's always going to be difficult. You know, where we've been, 6 weeks ago we were 19th or whatever we were in the league, and we've got ourselves into a mid-table, but to go again into that top six, you can see the quality that they've got in their squad. It'll be the same again against Sheffield Wednesday next week. So since that sort of winning run we put together a week or two back, it's been sort of win, loss, lose, win, lose. So the boys have responded in the previous defeats. We have to make sure we do that next week against Sheffield Wednesday.
You brought Michael Hector in for his first. Obviously, already mentioned the penalty, which could have gone either way, I guess. But what did you make of his full debut?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult game to throw him in, I suppose. But Ryan's played a lot of football this season, more than he's played in previous seasons up to now. So we felt we needed to shuffle the pack there. And as I say, I don't think there was a lot in the game. I think he gets across Michael for the header for the second goal, so he'll be disappointed with that, obviously. But I think, as I say, there wasn't a great deal in the game. You look at it, and the chance with Jez and so much good stuff, but just a lack of care. It just really cost us both boxes.
Obviously, Macaulay came in to start again today. What did you make of his performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's looking. I think a goal will help him. I think Chuck's obviously started his first league start there the other night in over a year, and to go again 3-4 days later would have been difficult. So we're quite light in that position at the moment. Obviously, Miles is coming back from his minor injury, and we have to keep going. We have to stick together and keep going.
I saw a stat on Macaulay in the first half, which I don't think is all on him, actually. I think that Charlton only got the ball to him 5 times in the first period. I mean, what can the team do to help him get involved more?
Yeah, well, one of the things we focused on is playing forward and running forward, and I think the last 2 games, this game and the Fleetwood game, we had a lot more of the ball. I mean, we've come here today, majority of possession of the ball, but I don't really care about that. And arguably we're better when we have less of the ball and we're playing forward, running forward and giving the opposition problems, and we don't think we got them in behind enough, and got Macaulay into the game in and around that 18-yard area.
You're probably sick of questions like this, because on Tuesday someone asked you about the playoffs, but now 3 days later Charlton are 16 points outside the top 6. There's still a game in half for Barnsley. Is it easy to keep the players motivated when for some it might feel there's not a great deal left to play for?
I don't question the motivation to play is to play for this football club and perform, and if I don't see that, they won't play. It's as simple as that. I think the headline the other day, from what I was told, was I've not given up on the playoffs or whatever it was. Someone asked me if the season was dead, and the season is never dead. That was me actually. Create a headline around that if you want, but is the playoffs too far a stretch? It looks that way. There's certainly loads to play for.
There's still standards to be set for next season, obviously, if you want to play a part in that.
Yeah,
as well.
everybody's playing for that, aren't they? Until the season is over, we will give everything in every game. It's not like, while I'm here, I don't think you can even question that. And as I say, if I see anything like that, then I'll act quickly. But I don't expect to see that again. It's not been a lack of effort today. I don't question that at all from the players. They were just better. They were better on the day.
And for yourself, I know it's probably conversation still to be had, but fans would love an update, because they're quite keen to know if there's anything between you and Thomas yet.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for me, because I'm doing, as you say, doing press conferences every 3 days, and I'm having to answer that question every 3 days. And the truth is, there's no update. I think I've already said there was due to be talks taking place sort of following this game. I expect that to be the case, and then obviously when there's an update, hopefully we get it resolved quickly. That's the key thing, so we can start planning for next season and really looking at the summer and what that looks like in terms of recruitment and all the rest. There's so much to do behind the scenes to make sure this club pushes on next season.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Dean, obviously you did have a lot of the ball and you got it close to 18-yard box a lot of the time, but you didn't quite create the chances. Why do you think it was so hard to break down Derby today?
I wouldn't say it was so hard to break them down. I think there was spaces and gaps for us to exploit, which we did. It was just a lack of care in that final pass. Whether it was a cross, I think there was one right at the beginning, right at the end of the first half, which summed us up a little bit. We got into a great position on the corner of the box and chose not to deliver and come back out. We ended up coming back and around, and you've got to, we looked at their back four today. There's players playing out of position. We didn't put them under nowhere near enough pressure to create enough chances to score.
Is that really frustrating? So obviously Derby plays such a high press, and once you've beaten that kind of first phase of the players, to then not quite create that final bit, is that really frustrating? Yeah,
it is massively frustrating, obviously, and I say it was just them moments when you can get your wide players in behind that we've done in recent games, we just weren't able to do enough of.
Do you think maybe the players, such a big crowd here today, very noisy, do you think the players maybe got slightly put off by that, and that's why the silly mistakes happened?
Ridiculous question, no, not at all. I just think it was a lack of care on our final pass.
Okay, that's Dean Holden there answering the questions from myself and someone else. After yesterday's defeat Yeah, I mean, you could tell he was frustrated, Joe. He was clearly frustrated at the end of the chat. I asked him about the contract update. Not much to talk about now, but if I didn't ask him and there was something that would have been a big miss from me. So no real update on that yet. Maybe there'll be more in the week as it comes on. But yeah, I mean, someone put in the comments he felt a bit more rattled than usual. Matt Morris said that. And I'd agree. And I guess that comes down to the fact that overall he saw a performance from his side that wasn't good enough and wasn't even at the levels he'd probably set over the last few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm probably in the minority because I'm a little bit critical of Holden at this stage in terms of I think we get out-thought during games too much. Other teams make little tactical changes and I don't think we adjust to them particularly. And yesterday, for an entire 90 minutes, I don't think he ever quite got to the point where he had his team outplaying or really on top. And he is going to be frustrated because he's come into a club that he thought was going to be moving in one direction. That direction has now changed. I mean, for me, none of us 100% know, but for me, I'm pretty much completely in the camp that the new lot brought Holden in, and it wasn't anything to do with Sangard. And so now he's sort of left holding the baby, but he's also not able to have any proper talks about what that looks like. So he's just kind of treading water, and then you get performances like that out of players, and he's kind of like, well, what is the point in battling on almost if people aren't gonna put the work in that you need them to on a Saturday? So yeah, he clearly is frustrated, but I think that we either need to do one of two things. We need to completely back Holden, and by that I mean, and that enable him to go out and recruit the backroom team that he wants, and then in the summer give him a proper budget to go and get the players he wants. Or we need to say, look, we're not going to deliver what you're looking for, and let him go. You've got to do one or the other. This sort of halfway house is just going to be very difficult for him. And let's not forget, he's a long way away from his family at the minute as well, while all this is going on. So he's not necessarily getting even the support that he needs. He seems to be very good at supporting the players and being a great bloke for the club. But even the strongest people, they need a bit of help sometimes. So yeah, I sort of echo his frustrations, but I do think that potentially we need to look at what we're giving him in terms of the tools to enable him to do that. Because I think he needs a tactician alongside him in the dugout, because he has said himself the tactical game isn't his strongest element.
I mean, do you think part of his frustration yesterday, Lewis, is what's been mentioned there by Joe about the fact that, I mean, it is no question that he was brought in by the Charlie Mevin lot for want of a mob, for want of a better phrase, because the three people he arrived with all left when that deal fell through. So do you think part of the frustration is that he came in thinking he was about to be, part of a project that he was happy to play a part of, whether the fans were that infused about what could have happened there. And now that's all been taken away from him. And he's been left to try and deal with an ownership that has struggled since they've come into the club and taken the club backwards and looked very silly over their time here. So he has come in expecting one thing, and now he's been left with something completely different.
Yeah, I think so. I think for anyone would be, wouldn't they? I mean, as you say, regardless of what we may think about Charlie Method and the sort of credibility of that takeover and where it would have led us in the short term, if the long term, I highly doubt. You come in as a project and with a team, and then within 6 weeks or so, that team is gone. Then yeah, I think it would be quite frustrating. And unsettling as well, not just for him, but for the players, because I know it's seen as an excuse sometimes, but all this talk behind the scenes doesn't help the players either. A lot of these players are out of contract in the summer. You don't know who the manager's going to be. Don't know if they're going to get deals. Don't know who the owner's going to be. It is a vicious cycle, and I think that uncertainty will filter down into the playing side, and then it's Dean's job to try and lift that and try and settle that. But likewise, he's probably feeling those same uncertainties. So it's a frustrating position for him to be in. difficult position for him to be in. And yeah, I picked up on that he was a little bit more snappy yesterday, to be honest, because that's not really been in his manner since he's arrived. And I think that is just pure frustration because he obviously doesn't really know what's happening, like many of us. And it's difficult to motivate a team when you don't know what's happening yourself. And I think that's a bit of an Achilles heel for us at the moment, is what always seems to be what's happening off the field rather than what's happening on it. You know, as a football club, we're sat stagnant, and it's so frustrating for not just supporters, but for players that, you know, sign up to be part of a project here, managers that come in here to be part of a project. It's frustrating for all, really, that we're kind of kneecapped at not being able to grow organically and not being able to develop and try and have a push for the championship, which, you know, where we should be. No club has a God-given right to be in a higher division, but when you look at us on paper, our target really, I think we're fairly accepting the Premier League days are long gone, but pushing, you know, to be back in that championship, that's probably where we want to be. And there's no reason why we couldn't be there with the right investment. The club's got such a good infrastructure in terms of the stadium and the academy and the training ground that it's all just sat stagnant, and that's where the frustration lies. And I think that's probably why Dean was so sold on the project at the time, because it is a big club in this division. And, you know, that project that he was sold would have been, you know, a certain amount of investment. We want to be here in X amount of years, and we're going to do this to do that. He would have known what Methven and that group's intentions would have been. And it was obviously enough for him to take the job. Now that's fallen through. It's a completely different story. So when, as he said in the interview, he's going to have chats with Thomas, hopefully, fairly soon. I think it's important we tie him down because we want to know what the future is beyond this season, beyond the end of this season. But
I mean, Thomas has sort of like put himself in a strange situation. If he's going to sell the club, which he seems to be trying to do, or not achieving very well, like everything else he's tried to do since he's come here. A lot of ownerships like to put new managers into place, their own man. You know, like we saw with Dean Holden, so that he could inadvertently tie the club down to a manager that a new owner doesn't want. You know, that's another bizarre situation that Thomas has managed to talk himself into. That we found over there. We're going to bring our guest in very shortly, but just finally, Wilson says, someone said on the socials yesterday that Derby have not actually spent a penny on transfer fees. Can you guys confirm this? Well, yeah, when we spoke to Mr. Bucock on Thursday, he confirmed that the Derby is still in some sort of embargo where they're not allowed to spend transfer fees. So it goes to show that their recruitment has obviously been a lot brighter than ours in terms of the players they've brought in for no fees. Obviously, it will come down to the sort of wages they're willing to pay as well. But yeah, that just shows where we are at the moment in time. Right, let's bring in our guest, shall we? This is a segment I hope to try and do pretty much every week, just to bring in a different face, really, from around the Charlton family. And I've started with a very good friend of mine today. So welcome to the Charlton TV commentator, Greg Stubley. Mr. Stubbers, how are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Good to hear from you guys. Enjoying my Sunday morning therapy. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah, well, we're really grateful for you coming and joining us on Charlton Live after a long day, particularly yesterday. I mean, we've heard Joe's and Lewis's thoughts on the game. You were there commentating with Tel. As we heard at the top of the show there, a long and frustrating afternoon, and a reminder of just how far we off, how far off we are comparing ourselves to teams like even Derby County, who weren't even that good.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was just the obvious lack of quality we had in comparison to Derby. I mean, you look at Derby's team; it's full of experience. I wrote down in my pre-match notes how many of their players have played in the Championship and above. And every single player who entered the field yesterday played in the Championship or indeed the Premier League, for a number of games, not just one or two matches. And that's the huge difference. You look at our team and you've got a few, obviously Sessegnon's played a little bit of Fulham. Raksaki's played a Premier League game for Palace, but they're more sporadic. I think the only one really is Michael Hector, and it was his full debut yesterday. So when you look at it like that, you can see how much we need to improve as a squad to get to the levels of a team like Derby, who aren't even in the top two. So it doesn't mean it's the be all end all. Sure, if you go through Plymouth's squad, for example, it might be similar in terms of lack of experience, but it's just having that quality to unlock teams. And the main player for me that we have to do that, we didn't get the ball enough to, and that's Raksaki. If you get him isolated quickly, he's shown how dangerous he can be, and we just didn't really have a game plan for him in particular. It felt like we needed to get players on the ball quicker, but it just didn't happen. We just took too many touches. I mean, you look at the possession stats, you look at the amount of passes we made, and you can see that we just took too many touches or took too many passes instead of being a bit ambitious, getting down the line, putting the crosses in, or targeting players a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and the frustration. I mean, one question I am going to ask other people. So, like I said, we've got the players that we think could play a part in a promotion push, which we're going to come up to in the next few minutes. But the other thing, and it's probably a question I have to ask myself every now and then, Greg, is how do you do it? How do you do it knowing that it's over? It's been over since about October. And how do we do it? Why do we keep doing it? Why do we go every week? What are we clinging on to? I guess it's the camaraderie, because the away end yesterday was fantastic. Was it 1,500 fans who've made their way up? The support was great. People were on the beers all day. They had a great day of it. And that's it, isn't it? It's about being with your mates. Unfortunately, this is the second year in a row where we've got to this stage of the season, and probably even earlier, where we've got naffle to play for, nothing to get our claws into in terms of on the pitch. We're going nowhere at this moment in time. Why do we keep coming back?
Well, I just wish you didn't remind me, to be honest, mate. But I think that, you mentioned it, the camaraderie, the people we do this with, it massively helps. And I'm sure for fans as well who go to these games, it's a lot of fun prior to the matches and post matches. It's part of getting out of, your work struggles or your day-to-day lives. It's part of releasing some frustration. And don't get me wrong, I'd rather be going and having some fun watching the matches as well. And I'm sure hopefully we'll have a couple of more before the end of the season, a couple of performances that we're really proud of and excited about. And for moments I think that's why Wembley was so emotional for us all as fans, because that Wembley day, albeit ending up not really doing much for us for the football club, but that day itself felt like a culmination of everything that we've been through and putting ourselves about. And I think having that experience is almost like an addiction, isn't it? You want to have those experiences. You want to be there for the good times so that you can remind yourselves, I went through these as the bad times. So there's no easy answer as to why we do this, but I think those are a couple of reasons why.
Yeah, in terms of the league, it's things like you want another Ipswich 4-4, a remarkable comeback like that. You just want those little moments. Matt said, nothing new though, is it? How many years have we been gash and the fans have carried on going purely because the day with your mates is great, which I agree with. A couple of more messages on yesterday's game. Stuart said today, our wide players were generally nullified and our final pass wasn't finding our man. Considering the difference invested in both squads, we lost to a slightly better side. Looking forward to Sheffield Wednesday next week. Mike Tyson said Hector was at fault for both goals. How can fans say he was decent today? My mind boggles. I thought he was appalling. And Alan says, youthful Leeburn apart, we've got no decent striker and getting none of them in has cost us. In Thomas Sangard times, we've had Davison, Washington, Swartz, Burstow, Stockley all going out. Injury-prone and Ike, ineffective Bond in. Thomas, get it. We need goals to get promoted. But for Raksaki, we could have been looking at League 2. So that brings us on to the question I've posed for the people in the live stream as well. Is of our current, a couple of people have tweeted similar questions as well actually today. Of our current squad, who could actually be someone that could be involved in a charge for the playoffs or the top two? Joe, I'll start with you. I'll bring up some of the comments onto screen as well, and we'll discuss them. But if I pose that to you, if I had to say you need to be confident that a player we're playing currently could be part of a spine of a side that could go for the top six or the top two, who would you say, and how few of them would it be?
Well, if we're going with just starters, you've got both goalies, Manabru and Woolacott for me. Egbo, if he can stay fit. Dobbo, Fraser, Blackett, Taylor, and Ike. Because I don't think we're going to keep Ness. I don't think we're going to keep Leeburn. I'm kind of ruling them out, but also they are youngsters. And then I think Innes is a squad player. That's it. That's all I've got. So I reckon there's a big old rebuild needed. You could maybe have the likes of Morgan and Payne as squad players, but I think they've got to be coming in as squad players. They're not central parts of your team that's going to get you promoted.
Yeah. I feel like there's Morgan and Payne even as squad players that would suggest. I mean, the fact that obviously Morgan's starting a lot of games at the moment, but Payne's he had some decent returns in terms of assists and goals at the start of the season. We've done nothing for months now, if we're being honest. Even so, Paul Davenport's put Maynard Brewer, Woolacott, and Ness, Fraser, Dobbo, Lieburn, Henry, Tupac, Kanu, and Mitchell. He said presumably won't get Raksaki and Cess back. The rest can have the odd half-decent game acceptable for your bench warmers, but not your first teams. I just wonder if the fact that we're even saying so many of the current squad is perhaps underestimating how far off we are. Like even Scott Fraser, I like Scott Fraser, but he goes too quiet too often. Like he had a good little spurt just around New Year, Lewis, but we're not seeing enough. Maybe if he was playing in a better side, we'd see a bit more. But I just wonder if because we see these players every week, and despite the fact that deep down we all hate them, we do sort of have a bit of an affinity with them, and because they're our team, we try and support them and G them up a bit. I wonder if we overrate some of our players. We're mid-table, and we have been for 2 years. So therefore, unless there's players that are really standing out, like ones who are former Chelsea youth products who aren't even ours, Raksaki, like are we, by saying even more than about 3, are we over egging the ability that some of these players have?
I think so, a little bit, yeah. Sometimes it is the sense of the best of a bad bunch, isn't it? And I remember a few seasons ago, well, over 10 years ago now, when we had that big rebuild in the summer under Chris Powell, and we let Jose Semedo go. I remember how gutted everybody was about letting Semedo go. And he just won Player of the Year, and we're thinking, why have we let him go? He's our best player by far. But it's only when he goes, he's replaced with players that were much better in Danny Hollands and Dale Stevens, that you notice maybe that actually are we pinning hope on players that are really just the best in a mid-table mediocre side. I can't argue with the stats of Dobbo. I mean, I do think Dobbo is fantastic. He has a couple of performances where he's maybe a little bit off it, but we become so overly reliant on him being the saving grace of our football team. The likelihood of him winning Player of the Year again this year is probably odds on again, because he is just that player that runs around, tries hard, makes a tackle, can create, but really he's just that lovable player because he puts the effort in. On Joe's list, I'd add Sean Clare just because of the versatility. I think, Sean has sometimes had a few wobbly performances at right back and has been caught maybe a little bit narrow, maybe when defending. But I do think that versatility and sometimes some of his performances have probably outweighed the negatives with him. But I agree with you. I think that when we look at the squad we have now, Jez is our most creative player that gives us the most goods, if you like. He's not our player. None of the strikers for me, bar Lieburn, I would keep. Blackett Taylor blows hot and cold. His final ball hasn't really been good enough consistently, but is dangerous in terms of pace. And then, as you say, Fraser inconsistent, but when maybe in a better side would be much more of a threat. But yeah, I think the lights, as you say, Albie Morgan, Jack Payne, players like that, for me, I think we're just clinging on to squad players. I don't really think if we're looking at a proper promotion battle and building a squad that's capable of promotion, that those kinds of players really have a place in a squad that's going to battle for the top 6.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that even Sean Clare was thrown into the mix there is a bit of a stretch. I remember saying to someone this time last year, the fact that he's probably in our top 3 for player of the season shows where we are as a club. He's versatile. He has good games. He had very good games, but at the same time, he's too inconsistent, and I think defensively he can be caught lacking at times, and probably not a surprise because he's apparently, being played out of position to an extent, although I've sort of forgot what his actual position is because he's played there for so long. Stubbly, Matt has said that he thinks Fraser with better players around him would be unplayable. Dan says if we've got a midfield 3 of maybe Fraser, Dobbo, and someone like Kilkenny. Kilkenny's obviously been dropped after his first couple of games already for Albie Morgan, which doesn't say a great deal about him. It's early days yet. But if you were to go through that list, is there anyone that you're thinking, yeah, I would really hang my hat on that player being someone who could lift the League One trophy at the end of next season? Playing for us, I mean, not signing for no one else.
I think the biggest issue for me is comparing squad players to first team players. So when you talk about, I don't know, promotion winning side, how many of these players would start week in, week out? I think we've got a few who could be part of a squad, and I think the names have already been mentioned. Fraser's one of those. For me, obviously, Dobbo, Corey, players like that. And you've got young players like Ness coming through who may well keep their starting spot. But I think Lewis made a really good point with Jose Semedo, where he was a player when we were mid-table in League One that was the standout, was a player of the season, and then he left and we replaced him with better quality. Now, if any of these players left, would I be sad? Maybe Dobbo and a few of them that I've spent time with before, but not really, to be honest, in terms of I think we can, with the right sort of recruitment, secure better players. And you watch games like yesterday against Derby, and I think what Derby did well in the summer without spending a penny was build a squad that had a bit of everything, really. They brought in Harahan in the middle of midfield to accompany Jason Knight, who's got a lot of energy, Max Bird, who's got a lot of energy, but maybe not the final bit of quality. If we have Dobbo and Fraser in our midfield, they're not the most mobile. In the summer, we put in Conor McGrandles alongside them, who isn't the most mobile as well. And he got a lot of criticism for the minutes he played, Conor. But again, in a midfield that might suit his qualities a bit more, he might be a player who comes out of nowhere and does better for Charlton next season. And these are the sort of things that I don't think have been considered by Charlton over the last year. I think we've identified maybe some good players or players with a bit of quality, but we've not put them in a side that accompany each other. And at times we look disjointed and we don't have balance. And that's, for me, the biggest issue we've got. And something else I want to raise as well. I don't think we've got enough players with the mentality and experience to get you grinding out results. If you look at the side we had under Lee Bowyer when we got promoted, they were full of players who, let's use Darren Prattley as an example. And I'm not saying we sign 11 Darren Prattleys, but there was that bit of experience and know-how in games where we might be struggling, but we can grind out results. I mean, you look at some of the stats when we've conceded a goal first. I think I've got one here. The last time we won a game conceding first was against Wimbledon last year, about this time last year. So this season, when we've conceded first, we've lost games. That has to change next season. If you want to be a promotion winning side, if you concede first, you have to have the mentality and belief you're going to go and win the game. And I think only since Wembley, when we've conceded first and gone on to win, has been twice. So it sums it up that we haven't had that sort of mentality within this squad and belief that we're going to go and win games. And there's almost an argument to suggest that we need to go and sign. And I mean, that comment that's come on the screen, we don't have that mental strength in our squad as well as the talent. And it's almost, you need a combination. We need a real solid think in the off season.
Yeah, just for the benefit of those listening on the podcast, the comments from Murray says that we have some talented players, but our players seem to lack the mental strength to get the necessary results. Stats-based recruitment won't tell if a player has this, something that Lee Bowyer pointed out, and it is certainly something that we've seen. It's funny as you mentioned Pratt's, we playing a big part in the team that's currently absolutely walking League Two, and I know it's League Two, and I'm not saying that Prattley is the answer in League One anymore, but that little bit of nous that he had that we saw in that playoff campaign when he was here with us, he lost it a bit when we got into the Championship, if we're being honest. He lost his head a few times, but someone like Pratt's is exactly perhaps what we can be missing at time. Dan saying if we had kept Prattley and had a three of Prattley, Dobbo and Fraser, it would be more solid. Yeah, and certainly a Prattley type, even like a Cullen type. Like, it's fair to say he's a bit more quality on the ball than Darren Prattley, but with that hard tackling as well. I mean, Davin saying that Dobbo, Ashley Maynard, maybe Corey Blackett-Taylor could have been part of a promotion push. I mean, this is one. I mean, all hell let loose, Lewis, in your role as fan advisor, saying, are you telling Thomas we need a major rebuild? I don't really know how those conversations between you and Thomas go in terms of squad depth. I know you tend to ask questions about the fact that are you sending the club and all that, but I mean, do you speak to him about the squad? Did you have conversations? Has he given you any indication that he's going to be here in the summer and he's going to go and sign 11 Darren Prattleys and 3 Macaulay Bonds?
No, he hasn't. It's not really something I discussed, the fan role is just about trying to improve a fan experience. It's not so much about the football inside. That's not in my remit. Of course, I do, when frustrated after losing a game, tend to email him quite harshly and aggressively about how we haven't done whatever in the January window, and I don't think it's good enough. But ultimately, I don't know how much my voice really counts in that. I have the same frustrations as every fan. I'm a Charlton fan first and foremost, so a lot of the frustrations that people have, I'm the first person to raise them with them because I feel them. I don't like going every week and losing and being out fought and out competed. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. So yeah, I raise it. It's not really something I have any power to, obviously. I don't work for the football club. I'm not paid member of staff, but as a fan with access to Thomas Sandgaard, I will obviously, and I always do, raise that I don't think we've done well enough in January. I was concerned that the business we have done in January, and then we've let all the people that did that business in January go because of a falling takeover bid. I raise it as much as I can, but how much that actually stands, I don't know. But it's pretty bloody obvious if you're Thomas Sandgaard that you need to rebuild in the summer because half your squad's out of contract. The squad that you have got in place at the moment is mid-table, and if he's serious about getting the club promoted, which I don't think he is anymore, if he's trying to sell, then he's got to hand it over to somebody that is willing to do that. But the most important thing, I don't think that he is going to invest any more into a promotion winning side because it's pretty clear he wants to sell. So what's key now is that if he is going to sell, that he hurries up and gets it done.
Wonderful stuff. Well, I think we should pretty much end there. A final comment from Danny said it was a golfing class again yesterday. You can see that Derby are top 6 and we are miles off it. It must be hard for the players to play for just a mid-table finish. But that is very much where we are. Right, we've run out of time on this week's Charlton Live. Thanks to everyone who's joined us on the live stream. The comments that's worked really well, actually. I'm really pleased with the comments, so keep those coming. Over our next few live shows, we'll be back on Thursday, 7 o'clock. To look ahead to the game with Sheffield Wednesday, which will be a real tough one. Thank you for Greg Stubley for being our first guest on this little segment. Absolute pleasure, Stubley. Matt Morris is asking what mug I was drinking out of. It was a Lincoln City mug. There you go. Just in case anyone was curious, it's a Lincoln City mug. Stubbers, thanks for joining us, mate. That was brilliant. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, cheers, guys. No, well done on coming into the new world with YouTube. Done well, mate. I look forward to seeing your faces every Sunday when I'm crying with my breakfast.
Lovely stuff. And if anyone else would like to put themselves forward as a chance to come on as the guest for the last 20 minutes of the Sunday show, feel free to drop me a message on Twitter. Massive thanks to Joe and Lewis. Congratulations on your YouTube debut, Joe. You really got dressed up for it, so well done, mate.
You can't wear pajamas every week, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Lewis, good to see you, mate.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Right, I'm Louis Mendez. Thanks everyone who's listened to the podcast and watched us on YouTube as well. We'll be back on Thursday, like I said, to look ahead to Sheffield Wednesday. I look forward to seeing you guys then.